I'm John Banther, and this is Season 7 of Classical Breakdown. From WETA Classical in Washington, we're your guide to classical music. In this episode, I'm joined by WETA Classical's Linda Carducci, and we're celebrating the life and music of Maurice Ravel at 150. There are a few things you may not know about this French composer, from his father's influence, his early works, and his experience in World War I, to his expulsion from the Paris Conservatory, not once, but twice. Plus, stay with us to the end as we'll enjoy a full performance of one of his iconic works. Okay, Linda, I am so excited to be back for Season 7, and I love that we're opening this season off with a composer that I know you and I both love, and also we're celebrating Maurice Ravel because he turns 150 this year as well.
He does. By the way, congratulations on 7 seasons of podcasts?
6 seasons, and now we're on to the 7th, yes.
Excellent. Congratulations. Yes, Maurice Ravel is one of my favorite subjects, John.
Now, I have a little story about him before we get into it, and it's a story that I think the significance of it and the meaning of it might sink in more as the episode goes on. But the story is, and it's a true story apparently, later in his life, as Maurice Ravel was super successful, there is going to be a street named after him in Basque in one of these towns, and that's all nice and lovely. So he agrees to be at the opening. You can imagine like a little ribbon cutting, scissors, and maybe some music and festivities. So the day comes, and everyone's ready. Everyone's at the street, but Ravel's not there. And they're waiting, and they're waiting. He doesn't show up, and they just go on with their street naming ceremony themselves. But the truth is, Ravel was there. He was there the entire time. He was sat in a cafe on the other side of the square, drinking wine, watching the entire thing. That is such an interesting thing to imagine, just Ravel sipping wine, watching all these people confused.
That's right. And it may speak, too, to this characteristic that he had in his life where he tended to be a little bit of a private person. He had a small circle of friends, but he was a private person. Maybe he felt sort of embarrassed by a big crowd giving him acclaim. Who knows?
Okay, that's a good point. Well, for you, Linda, what is it about Ravel's music?
To me, it's the clarity, the purity, the refinement of textures. I would say overall, but second, the gorgeous harmonies, especially when I hear his piano music. Well, it's into orchestral music too. Just beautiful, inventive harmonies. And I appreciate his creativity too, because sometimes he would use old forms like the old classical sonata form or the Baroque suite, and put new ideas into it, new harmonies, new ways to sort of craft it within the old structure. And then, of course, he developed new styles, like his jazz-tinged piano concerto in G that was inspired by his friend George Gershwin. So I think within all of that entire package is a really unique product.
And what about for you in maybe playing his music as a pianist or hearing it in that setting?
Yes, I first encountered Ravel's music, piano music, really, when I was studying piano in college. Previously, I had sort of lumped Ravel with Debussy as, quote, impressionistic, I didn't know any better. But my piano teacher in college was a great admirer of the music of Ravel, and he gave all of his students Ravel music to study. So it was something for me that was new. I think this is maybe my freshman year or something like that. And so I was studying it, but I think what really drew me to it was a small piano recital that my piano teacher had for all of his piano students. And it was held in his relatively small piano studio, so it was an intimate setting. Almost like a master class. And one of the students was getting a graduate degree in piano, and I thought he was just a wonderful pianist. And he sat down and over the course of a few weeks played a few of the Ravel pieces that just completely blew me away. Because for one thing, I was hearing those beautiful harmonies and sonorities. He played so beautifully with light textures and colors. And it was a small setting very close to a beautiful Steinway grand piano. And I remember at one point when he played something, no one spoke afterwards. We were just so enthralled with it all. So I think I was hooked from that moment on.
For me, Ravel was basically a catalyst, I think, for what made me realize I couldn't do anything but music. I was in high school, and I was in the high school program at Tanglewood, which is the summer home for the Boston Symphony Orchestra. It's in Western Massachusetts, and it's some beautiful landscape. But that also meant you could basically just walk in or sneak into Boston Symphony rehearsals at will anytime he wanted.
Mm.
And one morning, I just walked into the Kusevitsky shed, which is where they play. It seats thousands of people, like 4 or 5,000 people, and there's no walls and the sides are back. Just opens up to the New England landscape. And I heard them playing Daphnis and Chloe, the ballet with choir. And it was one of the most beautiful moments that I've had in music because the sun is pouring in. This incredible texture and sound of the sunrise is coming through in the music.
Mm.
Birds are flying above me, chirping, in that shed concert hall. And it was just an experience like none other. I still think about it time to time.
I can imagine. That would be wonderful. Not just the landscape, but also the beautiful sounds of the orchestra.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I can still see it, how the sun was just just pouring in. And then there's some try-hard ushers, of course, who they don't want you to be there. But the shed is so big, they start walking to you. You just start walking away to somewhere else. They can't catch you.
Right.
But anyway, let's jump into his early life. What was Maurice Ravel doing, I guess? Where was he born? When was he born? What was happening?
He was born on March 7th of 1875, and therefore we're celebrating his 150th birthday this year, in France, but it was a Basque town in France near the Spanish border, and that's very relevant to his entire life and how Spanish music influenced his entire life.
Yeah.
His mother, his adored mother, was a French Basque, and she would sing to him Spanish songs, and so he got the sense of the idiom and rhythms and all. And he would spend his childhood summers in the Basque Mountains, and there he would hear the folklore and Spanish music. And we hear it in so many of his works that he wrote as an adult.
Like L'Hour Espagnol, The Spanish Hour, Alborada Gracioso, those works.
Yes, Rhapsody Espagnole, and of course, Bolero.
Oh, yes, can't forget that. And we'll get to that one in a little bit. But also on his father, there's something interesting here. His father was basically an inventor, and I wonder how much of an impact this had on the young Maurice Ravel, because his father, literally, like in the 1860s, he's helping pioneer like the steam-powered automobile. He creates an acetone-fueled two-stroke engine shortly after that. That invention that lets swimmers, like Olympic swimmers, swim in one place, in a pool, and the water's moving. I think he invented that mechanism for that pump or whatever, which also leads to the jacuzzi. So I'm saying he's seeing his father probably, come home and say, "Oh, this thing didn't work for the 400th time. Next week, I think we're going to move the rod to this side." So I feel like him seeing that, a father who's looking at something in a different way, bringing entirely new things to the public, had to have an impact. And he even there's a quote he has about his father. He said, "Throughout my childhood, I was sensitive to music. My father, much better educated in this art than most amateurs are, knew how to develop my taste and to stimulate my enthusiasm at an early age." So for me, Linda, he's teaching him music, but more importantly, I think he's teaching him how to think and how to question and work through things.
Interesting. I think it also gave little Maurice a trait that carried him through his life, and that is attention to detail and intricacy, which I think you need if you are going to be an engineer like you're talking about. That became a hallmark of Maurice Ravel's music, that attention to intricacy, attention to detail. In fact, Igor Stravinsky, who was born just a few years after Maurice Ravel and was a great admirer of Maurice Ravel's music, called him, quote, a perfect Swiss watchmaker.
A perfect Swiss watchmaker.
Perfect Swiss.
I mean, that's what it also is, because we'll get into it a bit more. His music can sound very improvisatory, very of the moment or kind of ethereal, but it's actually the result of meticulous, and as you said, attention to detail for every note and for, every articulation and dynamic. So he's learning music at an early age. He's 7 years old, getting some piano lessons. He starts to compose a little bit. We don't have a lot of information. Naturally, we think his father had a lot of guidance in this area. But in 1889, when he is 14 years old, he gets accepted into a preparatory piano class at the Paris Conservatoire. At the conservatory, and these still exist at conservatories. There's pre-college, they call it, or preparatory classes. But that's what Ravel gets into. And this starts the tumultuous relationship that he would have with the conservatory. I forgot, or maybe I didn't even know, Linda, he got kicked out twice of the conservatory. And there was so much drama or scandal that the government even got involved. And we'll get into that in a little bit. But for now, he's there at the conservatory, 14, 15 years old, and he's surrounded by this music, and now he's really, really studying the piano, it sounds like.
Yes, in fact, I think there might be artists who say, hey, unless you're kicked out of a place like a conservatory, you're not doing something right.
Yeah, that is, there's a lot of this person attended this college but not graduated this college in a lot of bios today still. But it was like a year or two later, 1891, he gets first prize in a piano competition. But then he didn't get any more prizes. And I guess at the school, if you don't excel and get at this level of a prize within 4 years, you're kicked out.
Right.
So he's 20 years old and he's kicked out. And we can actually listen to a little bit of a work he wrote at this time, just a year later, Serenade Grotesque. So he's about 21 years old when he writes this, and while there's some moments that are juvenile sounding, several things stick out in a way that I think you hear in some of his works decades later. Now, 2 years later, Linda, he gets back into school. It's 1897, but the school, the director, apparently conservative director, did not like what Ravel was doing. He did not like the direction he was heading in, and it would begin another period of no prizes. And then he would get kicked out again in 1900. And after that point, he still wanted to study with Gabriel Fauré at the school, but in order to do so, he had to just audit the class, not officially. In the class. So he was rather not liked by the conservatory director.
You have to give him credit for his tenacity to just keep going back to the conservatory. He wanted to study. And I'm really glad that he studied with Gabriel Fauré. Gabriel Fauré his own music was heading into sort of a modernist sound, slightly. Gabriel Fauré coming out of the Romantic era. Maybe he tempered Maurice Ravel a little bit, coming down a little bit from some of these modernistic tendencies that Ravel may have had. But that said, Ravel's early compositions were just deemed to be too modern, and he joined an avant-garde music group called Les Apaches, which could be translated as the Hooligans. So that tells you where they were.
Yeah.
They were exploring new sounds. They were musicians, and they had forward-looking ideas. So that's what Maurice Ravel sort of hooked onto.
Yeah, I read that Les Apaches, the Hooligans, I mean, they would get together on Saturday evenings. They'd be drinking and smoking and playing music and arguing about ideas until the next morning, apparently. And with a name like the Hooligans, I mean, I think something happens, Linda, once you reach age 30 and above. When you see a group of like teens walking towards you, it's like, oh my God, youths. And you get a little nervous maybe. So I think maybe there's this little aspect of that as well, of a rowdy nature to these young players.
Oh, it could be, but for me, it's hard to think of Maurice Ravel as anything but a very buttoned up, very tidy, meticulous man and composer. He wore beautiful clothing. Everything was very meticulous and tailored suits and all that.
Yeah.
Who lived almost as in semi-solitude during his life. It's hard for me to believe that he was that rebellious young man at the Conservatoire.
Maurice the Hooligan Ravel. But let's actually take a look at what happened between 1900 and 1905 with the famous Prix de Rome composition competition at the school, because this would lead to scandal. This is that big competition where if you win, you get a trip to Rome, you study, you have more music performed. It's a very, very big deal. So let's hear a few works from this time that did not get him the approval of the faculty and did not get him any prize or Prix de Rome. So here is a little example of an overture he wrote, Scheherazade. Now, this was just an overture to an opera that never came to be. This is big, it's rich, it's colorful. Maybe it's similar to Rimsky-Korsakov in a couple of ways.
Sure, it reminded me a little bit of Debussy.
And it was just something the school, pass. They didn't really care about this. Okay, so the next one actually we'll just play a little bit without even saying what it is. Oops, Linda, isn't this like one of his most performed, most loved work by audiences for some, the Pavane for a Dead Princess?
It sure is, and not recognized.
No. I can sort of imagine, or I can sort of see why with this one. This is a work that became, I think, popular in a way like Rachmaninoff's Song Without Words.
Hmm.
It's a beautiful tune that people just grabbed onto and was very popular. But I can see a sliver of why the conservatory, some of these directors might say, yeah, pass on this too.
I see. But the Pavane, for a Dead Princess, a Pavane is a slow, stately court dance that was danced by aristocrats and appears to have originated in Spain during the Renaissance era. So here again, we have an example of Ravel drawing on Spanish music, his Spanish background.
And here is another example, another work he submitted and received no prize for, Les Bayadères. I mean, this one sounds like a great work for a prize, I think. I mean, this is wonderfully mature. It's evocative. I mean, it's just a great piece. But again, the conservatory said no.
It's sweeping. It's very well orchestrated.
Yeah, it's a lovely work. But again, the school says no. So there was drama after he did not win the prize from 1900 to 1905. It becomes a big deal because he's now turning 30. He's a well-known composer. At this time, his music is being performed. He's now also at the age limit of the competition. And for the last one, he did not even make it past the first round. And the public and people that admired his music really got upset. And it got so scandalous. The government got involved. There were resignations, there were firings. And in the end, Gabriel Fauré took over as director. But in the end, kind of as you said before, getting kicked out of a place is, sometimes good. Also, is it like, all press is good press? I mean, this scandal for Ravel, he didn't win the prize, but maybe he won something better.
Yeah.
But I was curious, Linda, who won the prizes during these years? So I went and I looked it up, and actually I didn't recognize any of the names or their music, except for one, André Caplet. And we're hearing an example from Suite Parcane. That's the only composer that I found that I recognize from those years. And we're hearing this music, and as I hear it, it sounds like it's much more tethered to the earth versus Ravel's more ethereal nature in his music. And I think that comes down to what you've said before, which was impressionist. But when you said it before about Ravel, it seemed almost derogatory, like, oh, it seemed like he was like some impressionist composer.
Yeah.
But that was something that people were thinking about or describing his music, people that didn't like his music, or Debussy's, oh, it's some impressionist, thing. It's just a depiction of a sunrise kind of thing.
Yeah, that can be maybe considered derogatory by a composer. They think they're deeper than that, more complex.
Yeah.
They don't want to be just, written off as just, oh, he's just producing pretty sounds that describe a sunrise or something.
So this comes down to symbolism, because I think when Ravel and Debussy, they hear impressionist, they think, no, this is deeper than that. It's not just, me washing orange and red together and pink on a paper and calling it a sunset or something. But rather, it's more. It's the idea of presenting musically absolute truths symbolically through metaphorical means. Mallarmé, a great symbolist, described it as evoking an object little by little so as to reveal a mood, or conversely, the art of choosing an object and extracting from it a meaning. So this goes against realism, the idea that a subject matter should be presented accurately, without exaggeration. If you think of art, like portrait paintings of presidents, you think those are just realistic realism paintings, but they're not. They're made in a way to evoke a very certain type of power and to evoke certain feelings on you. Realism is about painting the person, flaws and all, exactly as they are. And symbolism rises out of the late 19th century with people like Mallarmé, who are trying to see things differently. And I think of it, Linda, like looking at something through a mirror.
Hmm.
So let's say we're in a museum, like one of those house museums, and you go to the artist's room and it's exactly as it was. There's a desk, the chair, papers, a bed. If I was a realist, I would just hold a mirror up to you to show you the other side of the room, the desk, the chairs, and everything, exactly as it is. But if I'm thinking about symbolism and portraying this to you that way, I'll hold the mirror up to you, but maybe I've drawn on the mirror. I've obscured objects so that you can't see them that are actually there, or I'll alter the mirror in a way that makes you think about the relationship between what's written on the papers and what's written on the bed. And it seems like this obscuring was something that the conservatoire director very much disliked. And that's a difference I hear in composers that they did like André Caplet, who seemed more realist, more
Mm,
depicting things as they are, more tethered to the ground, I think.
I see. We saw that almost like in the Romantic era. There were people who were a little bit more conservative and traditional, like Brahms,
Yeah.
and then there's people like Wagner who are coming out of that a little bit.
So let's look at an actual example here of some symbolism in his music. He used in his song settings symbolist poetry in his first ones, like in 1896, Sant or Saint. It's a song he writes with a poem of the same name by Mallarmé. But what does the poetry mean exactly here as you read it? And I think, like all poetry, and by extension here, songs, the more that you listen, the more that you read it, even reading it out loud, the more you will be gaining from it. And of course, there's a long running joke, even for Stéphane Mallarmé, you need a French translation too, because you read a poem and you think, what? What? So I'll read a little bit of this one. He writes, "At the window that harbors the old sandalwood of flaking gilt of the viol that sparkled once to flute or mandola, stands the pale saint displaying the ancient unfolded book of the Magnificat that glistened once to vespers and compline. At this monstrance glass, brushed by a harp which the angel forms in his evening flight, for the delicate fingertip that, lacking the old sandalwood and the ancient book, she poises on the instrumental plumage, musician of silence." Now, there are a couple of English translations of that, and again, you might hear that, especially the first time, and think, what?
Yeah.
What just happened? But just to think about, the second kind of middle part of it where it says, "On this monstrance glass brushed by a harp which the angel forms in his evening flight." You can think of this, it's a small figurine or statue
Hmm.
at this type of altar against glass. He's describing in very different ways. The angel's wing is shaped like a harp. It's not an actual harp, being formed like this. It's using the harp to describe the shape of this angel's wing and perhaps the way that it flies. And also the accompaniment changes here. It's mostly downbeats on the piano. Now it sounds like we're strumming once we get to this harp part. But are we talking about an actual harp or what that represents? There's a lot more. And the whole thing is on the Saint Cecilia, patron saint of music and Catholicism. There's a whole lot wrapped up in like just 50 words. But that's to say, there is more to this than just, I think, the surface level idea of Impressionism that maybe Ravel thought was maybe a little off-putting.
I see.
He's doing more than that.
So would we consider him impressionist? Or I mean, some people do consider him or Debussy
Yeah.
impressionist composer.
I mean, for me, it's like Impressionist does not have that connotation today that maybe it did back then in terms of it's just splashing some things together. So it sounds he's 80% symbolism and 20% impressionist, maybe something like that. I don't know.
But it was a term that Ravel and Debussy did not like, maybe because, as we mentioned earlier, that's too easy a term. It doesn't get into the complexity of their work or the symbolism that's behind their work.
Mhm.
That said, though, we have to admit, though, that there are certain things that Debussy and Ravel wrote that I think were impressionistic in that they depict an impression of something like the sparkling waters that are depicted in his Jeu d'eau, or the scary images that we hear in Gaspard de la Nuit. He also put it in his suite called Miroir.
And it almost sounds to me how maybe jazz is viewed today. Maybe there's something similar to that. People think with jazz, it's some jazzy tunes and some improvisation. You're just playing these notes that they come up with. They think it's just, it's this thing that just kind of happens and it's there. But no, that is one of the most complex musical languages that people dedicate their entire lives to. And so there's so much more than just, they're going ba-doo-ba-doo-ba, something like that.
Yeah, sit down and play. Just play.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where, again, it's kind of hard to totally unpack, but that's kind of where he is with the Impressionism, symbolism aspect of it. Now, we can look at his life after the Conservatory. He wrote in 1903, just when he was kicked out for the last time, his string quartet, which is an astonishing work, and it's unfortunate that he only wrote one, and it remains a standard in the repertoire. You hear it used in movies, particularly the second movement and all those pizzicatos. It's one people have probably heard in some way.
It's one of my very favorite chamber pieces of any composer is Ravel's string quartet. That first movement, I always feel like I'm floating in water.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that movement with the pizzicatos.
Yeah.
I saw a documentary years ago on Jacques Cousteau.
Okay.
And they were showing, the underwater voyages that he would do. And they were showing the dolphins very gracefully moving around in the water, and they used that Ravel pizzicato movement to show it. It worked perfectly.
I can see it in my head with the dolphins and everything. I love that. This work is also an example of how open and I think curious and accepting Ravel was, because it was like 20 years later, there was an arrangement of the quartet made for Ons Martineau, if I'm even saying that right.
Yes.
And 99% of people, I imagine, don't know what that is. I didn't know what it was. It was a keyboard, an electronic keyboard, invented in 1928, similar to the theremin, which you use an actual keyboard in slightly different ways. Ravel saw the arrangement and thought, great, love it.
Good.
And there was also like a piano arrangement. He liked that one as well. It was one that he didn't do. But I think that this shows that he wasn't just open to new sounds. He was actively embracing them.
Yeah. I think there's an interesting story about the string quartet. Fauré, his teacher, Gabriel Fauré, loved it.
Yeah.
But he wasn't thrilled about the last movement.
Okay.
But Debussy, however, who was 13 years older than Ravel, wrote to Ravel and he said, don't change a note.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't change anything.
Yeah.
And there's some times where you get composers like that, or I'm thinking of Clara Wieck, where they follow that advice, and it's for the best. They don't change anything. Keep it as you wrote it. But it's during this time, 1905 to 1914, when he's writing his most popular works, some of his most popular works, and he's seeing great success. The Mother Goose Suite, Sentimental and Noble Waltzes, the Alborada de Gracioso, all of these actually written for piano first and then orchestrated. That was a common thing for Ravel. Write it out for piano and then orchestrate it, which then really makes you think, how is he hearing these things exactly? Because, is it chicken or the egg? Is he thinking of the orchestration and putting the piano down first, or is it really just piano and he doesn't think about the orchestration until later?
I don't know, but I will say this, just to clarify, he wasn't writing, say, in a draft form in the piano version to be orchestrated later.
Right.
The piano version was a beautiful, complete version in itself.
Published, and you can perform it.
Yes.
And that also gives his work more length and more usefulness, because there's a lot of works for the piano that are, as he wrote them, published and everything, and then he also wrote them for orchestra. So you get, double the use out of some of this music.
Yeah.
He also wrote Gaspard de la Nuit. Incredible that he wrote this so early. I always forget he wrote that in 1908. We talked about that last season.
An amazing work for him being that young. Very, very mature, difficult work.
Yes. And also, a few years later, in 1912, he writes his longest work. Many people think it's also his most complex. One of my favorites, obviously, the ballet, Daphnis and Chloe. That was also early on in his life.
Yeah. Is this what you said you heard at Boston?
Yes, this was the piece for me that really changed, I think, my brain chemistry or something. Yeah.
Interesting. Ravel himself called Daphnis and Chloe a choreographic symphony. because and that's a very good way to describe it, because it's music that it accompanies a ballet, which is a story about a goat herd and a shepherdess, told in ballet form, but you can take it outside of the ballet realm as you heard it and just listen to how exciting it is on its own as an orchestral work.
And you can find some performances of the ballet on YouTube. Just beautiful. Beautiful
Oh,
work.
absolutely. I think that work really is a great example of his mastery of orchestration.
I think so too. And that's where we get into, well, what makes Ravel sound like Ravel? Part of it is, I think, the symbolism, but part of it is really the orchestration, as you said, his ability to put instruments together to create new or particular sounds. And this is what I'm talking about with his father,
Hmm.
the influence of his father, who, he's inventing stuff, and he's got 300 ways of this thing doesn't work. I'm going to move this over here and see what happens next week. And so I think with that type of experimentation and patience, he was able to do things like in Bolero, he combines piccolos in octaves with clarinet and celeste, also in octaves, in a way that creates an instrument that I've never heard before in Bolero. That's one example of the orchestration, and I think his father's influence for me on that.
But interestingly, too, none of that ever comes off as heavy. I mean, we're not talking about Brahms here.
No.
He adds wonderful color and textures to his orchestration, but it's never heavy.
No. And I was thinking, actually, driving in today, as big as Ravel's music gets, it's never descending into like an existential moment like with Stravinsky in Rite of Spring. It never quite reaches that level of kind of existential, I don't know, like the pain that Tchaikovsky writes.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think that's also a hallmark of Ravel's piano music. Is these kind of light textures where you can hear things.
And we'll get into the event that split Ravel's career in two next, right after this. Now, Linda, we get to a world event that splits Ravel's career in two. I feel like we have his life before World War I and after World War I. In 1914, as the war breaks out, Germany invades France. Ravel tries to enlist, but he's rejected, naturally because he's nearly 40, and he also has a minor heart issue. Like he wanted to be, I forgot, Linda, or I didn't know, he was short. He was 5'3".
Yes.
And so 5'3", he's thin, he wants to be a pilot. He wants to be an aviator. And naturally, their thought process is, well, he's going to take off and then crash immediately with his problems. But anyway, he eventually gets in. He becomes an ambulance driver, which sounds like to me one of the second worst position to be in, besides the person fighting, is the person driving up in an ambulance in a war with chemical weapons like World War I and just the munitions and bombardments. Stravinsky said and noted his courage, saying he could have done anything at all with his name, his position in society. He could have done nothing or anything else, but he chose this. That was quite courageous.
Do you think that is reflected in his music at all?
I think it is reflected in how he was writing music afterwards, or some of the other aspects of writing, but I don't know in terms of writing it actually into music compared to someone like Vaughan Williams with his war symphonies.
Yes, I agree with you.
Yeah. So there is a work that comes out of this period. Naturally, he's not writing really anything at all during this time, but he does come up with Le Tombeau de Couperin, which is a work you mentioned earlier, and each movement is dedicated to a friend that died in the war. All musicians or composers, and of course, there's tons of composers and musicians that died in the war because they had no choice. They were drafted and then then they died. But Ravel survives and he writes this work, dedicating it to those people, or some of them.
Yes, and this is one of my very favorite Ravel pieces, particularly the piano version. I think it's so beautiful. First heard this in college, as I mentioned earlier. This is my first introduction to piano music of Ravel. And it's an example of him putting his own unique spin on a traditional form. And this is a style, this is the form that Ravel would use with other things too. In this case, 18th century Baroque suite that has a prelude, followed by traditional dance movements from the Renaissance or the Baroque era. He did that same thing, but he put unique harmonies into it, unique spins. And every time I hear it, I just, I'm taken by the sonorities and the harmonies, how beautiful it is.
Yeah.
Not to mention the fact that how it came about. As you say, he dedicated each one of those movements to a friend who had been killed in the First World War.
So many composers reach back into time for forms to do something new or different with, like Ravel, like Stravinsky, Schoenberg in part of his career.
Yes.
These inventive people, they are very thoughtfully looking to the past.
And by the way, talking about how Ravel would write piano pieces and then later orchestrate them, Tombeau is an example. He removed two of the movements from the piano version and then orchestrated that suite. And it's beautiful, of course, but you know what? I prefer his piano version.
So do I.
Do you?
The way that you are able to, I think there's more texture and more things with articulation and also rhythm that you can do as one person at the piano than you can with an orchestra.
Yeah.
It's one of the few works that I hear the piano version, I think, wow, I really, really, really like this.
Me too.
Now, before the war, Ravel's output was pretty slower than most. He would basically put out one work a year. That was his output. And then after the war, it gets worse. You can imagine, I mean, we see today the firsthand, like the horrors that we see, on cell phone videos around the world today of just unspeakable tragedy. I can't imagine being Ravel in the war, going through all of this, having to maintain some sort of composure, and he also needed like surgery on his bowels in 1916. I mean, if you describe to me the process of what that surgery was in 1916, I would just say, no thanks.
Yeah,
no
very
thanks.
primitive.
I mean,
primitive.
But he does it. And there's another point here, Linda, that I think showcases his acceptance and his curiosity. During the war, a national music league is formed to protect French music and ban contemporary German music performances. Naturally, they want Ravel to be a part of this. And Ravel, he wouldn't join. He said it would be dangerous for French composers to ignore systematically the productions of their foreign colleagues and thus form themselves into a sort of national coterie. Our musical art, which is so rich at the present time, would soon degenerate, becoming isolated in banal formulas. Needless to say, Ravel did not convince them of any of this, that isolation is bad, it's going to do more harm than good. They banned his music at their concerts. Ravel didn't really care at all. He stood by his morals in that. I thought that was something quite interesting.
Me too. I think this shows his open-mindedness. At the same time, I think that he also believed that German music was a little bit fuller and heavier in texture than French music. And he said he just preferred music that was a little bit more sparse and spare in texture than German music. Still, I agree, he did not believe that you should ban anything.
Two other things happen in the war. There's two deaths that have an effect on his life. The first one in 1917, his mother, Marie de Loire, she dies, and that basically sends him into despair. Maybe that's also part of, he's now 3 years into the war, and then this happens.
His mother was very important to him all of his life. She introduced him to Spanish idioms, Spanish music, etc. He was very close to her. His compositional output slowed significantly after her death.
Yes. And then a year later in 1918, Debussy dies, and many look to Ravel to be the new torchbearer of French music.
Yes.
And I think also the government thought this as well, because there's another, I think it's kind of funny, story. After the war, the French government gives Ravel the Legion of Honor in 1920, which is the highest award, from what I read, for anyone in France, military, civilian, whatever. It's the highest merit award they have. And Ravel said, nah, no thanks. I don't feel like it. Nah. I thought that was quite incredible. One, I'm sure that person had a very bad day, whoever nominated Ravel, going home, Ravel wouldn't accept it.
Yeah.
That put you in a bad mood.
Sure.
I bet he didn't like him after that either.
No, but this may have been Ravel's way of saying, "Hey, you spurned me the Prix de Rome.
Yeah.
How many times?
Yeah.
No, I'm not
No.
going to give you the satisfaction now."
But also right after this, basically at the same time, there is a new set of les apaches. There's a new set of hooligans, les six, the six. This is the new generation of composers, and now Ravel is naturally seen as the establishment.
Yeah.
And of course, they are going to do things that go against that. And what I love is Ravel simply didn't care. He didn't care that this new group, or he simply understood this is the natural progression of things. And he actually preferred this reaction from a young group of composers than them trying to emulate him. So it's like he just understood, these are teenagers and 20-somethings,
Yeah.
excited in writing new music. Of course, they're going to be not happy with what I'm doing all the time necessarily.
Yeah. But this shows a confidence now that he has. I can just see him saying that, cigarette in hand.
Yeah.
Beautifully, impeccably tailored suit, beautifully, impeccably tailored haircut.
Yeah.
Saying, go ahead, I don't care.
Yeah. Because this sort of happens again in a much more professional way, I guess. George Gershwin wanted lessons with Ravel in the 1920s.
Yeah.
And you can imagine, this is a lot of people go to France to either seek out someone like Ravel or Nadia Boulanger, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And Gershwin asks Ravel for studies, and Ravel thinks about it and says, nah, no. And the whole point was, I think he said, like, he will just become a second-rate Ravel. He's already a first-rate Gershwin.
Yeah.
He knew he needs to have his voice in what he's doing. He's already on that path. He doesn't need me. So I think his ego is also quite healthy in that aspect.
I do too. I think there's a lot of wisdom in that comment.
And I got a million examples of these, Linda, of him being open and accepting of new sounds. Do you know his second violin sonata?
No.
He wrote it from 1923 to 1927, and I love it because there's an entire movement called blues. So by this time, you can imagine Ravel has heard, a lot of the early jazz and blues. They were being played in the Parisian cafes, imported from the United States, and he loved it. And he thought, this is a great sound that especially American composers, you should be incorporating this into your music. And he does it himself. And it reminded me of Dvorak, who in the 1890s was pleading with American composers, use your source material here. And of course, everyone's like, nah, no.
John, I think that would be a great topic for a podcast in the future.
Yeah.
How jazz has been incorporated into classical music.
Yeah.
Because I just played Rachmaninoff's Fourth Piano Concerto not too long ago on the radio.
Yeah.
And he was influenced by Gershwin a little bit by that and going to the jazz clubs.
That's right.
There are several examples of that.
And that is just an example of his openness that unfortunately not everyone followed suit on. Now, another example of his openness, he embraced recording technology like almost no other musician besides maybe Rachmaninoff. We can actually hear recordings of Ravel from piano rolls. Basically, the roll, the piece of paper that the piano plays itself, that kind of thing.
Yes.
When you make those back in the day, there's a great video I'll put up that shows you use like a recording piano that uses these pistons to put marks and stuff on the paper. So we can actually hear how Ravel played pretty closely because he used this recording piano to create these piano rolls. And so we can just, have that recreated today.
Fascinating. That reminds me of one thing, though, that, Ravel, of course, was a pianist. That was his primary piano instrument.
Yeah.
And he played well, of course. But he couldn't play Gaspard La Nuit, a piece that he wrote. It is that difficult.
Yes. So after the war, he is that's where I feel like his career is kind of split. He's embracing all kinds of new things, but as you said, his output is being slowed quite tremendously. And he is not the same type of soloist that could play something like Gaspard de la Nuit. But even though we couldn't play that, he was invited on a USA tour in 1928. He visited 25 cities. He was paid $10,000. And the most interesting part of all this, of his contract, I think, Linda, was not the money, but that also part of the contract was he had to have a steady, like, unlimited supply of a specific French cigarette. Like,
Galois,
yeah,
coming from his lips. Yeah.
yeah. So he needed his guaranteed, travel and direct deposit, but he also needed something else in his rider too for that. So I thought that was a little funny.
Yeah.
But he was so popular when he came here. I mean, audiences were jumping up for him just when he went to his seat. And again, I think he's strong mentally. He didn't really care. Critics were, going nuts for his music. And he said, yeah, it means as much to me now as when they didn't like my music.
That's a confidence to a certain extent.
I think it's the quiet confidence and assurance he has in himself as to who he is. If you like it, you like it. If you don't, you don't. I know what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
I also think of there's a quote, I don't care about your booze. I've seen what makes you cheer. So I wonder if in part now Ravel realizes now I'm the one being cheered.
Yeah.
Maybe now I'm on the other side. Something also maybe similar with Ravel's work, Bolero, arguably his most heard and recognized work. We even did an episode on it a couple of seasons ago. But it was also one that really annoyed him, saying, like, there's no music in it, but it's my most popular piece.
Yeah, it's funny he would say there's no music. Of course, he was being modest, but he was baffled by the popularity of Bolero.
Yeah.
I think people either hate or love Bolero. At least that's been my impression. I fell into the first category, hated it, when I was very young. I didn't get it.
Yeah.
I just heard this melody repeated over and over again. But as I've grown older, I've come to appreciate the internal workings of the orchestration. Not just that it gets loud in volume and the crescendos. I get that, but the orchestration is just fabulous, as you were saying. And has celesta and has a lot of different instruments in it, and I think there's a certain humor to it also, because he's saying, look, I'm going to take this theme and I'm just going to keep playing it over and over and over again, of course, at different volumes, almost like a parody. And this is another example, I think, of his being drawn to Spanish music. A bolero is a Spanish dance, the music that he heard while growing up, spending summers in the Basque Mountains. He wrote Bolero as a commission for a Spanish-themed ballet. Mm-hmm. And the story is that Ravel asked a friend over to the piano when he was writing it and played him the bolero melody with one finger. And it's a very short melody, as you know. And he asked his friend, don't you think this has an insistent quality? I'm going to try to repeat it a number of times without any development, gradually increasing the orchestra as best I can.
Yeah.
He did that, and then, of course, I love the very ending of it all. It's as if it comes to this big climax with the horns just blaring, almost in dissonance.
It's a work that I've always enjoyed because I almost never listen to it. So when you listen to it, it's an experience of, one, hearing all the inventive sounds he makes with the orchestration, but also I think the performance art aspect of it, in that everyone on stage is tuned into one goal and one focused thing for the entire piece. And for almost any other piece, everyone is doing and thinking different things regarding their part, who they're playing with, and so on. But this, we're all on the same page, and it starts from nothing, and it's like, you push a snowball or a marble down a mountain, and it's not going to stop, and it goes all the way to the end. But it's one I do not like to play. I've had to play it before with orchestra, and tuba doesn't play till the very end. You just play downbeats, and it is a little different when you're sitting there having to hear it over and over and over. Thankfully, when you rehearse it, you don't rehearse it for like an hour.
I see.
But still, it's more fun to be in the audience, I think, at least from my chair.
Sure.
Yeah.
How is that done, by the way? If it's taking one theme and he's increasing the dynamics, he's crescendoing every time. How does the conductor convey that this time I want you to be a little bit louder than you were just 3 minutes ago?
Well, this is an instance where everyone knows and you're hearing you need to be very, very gradual. If you suddenly play louder, it's like, are you paying attention? You know,
Okay.
what's going compared to like a work, say you come in after not playing for 10 minutes, they'll convey that by putting their hand up to you, like, you know, like they don't want you to cross the street, that the hand, we call it the hand. Some conductors, and it's the ones that people often don't like playing with, they'll put their hand up before an entrance. And
Mm.
that is not looked well upon by players, to put your hand up before an entrance.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah,
I'll do things, I just won't come in. I'll do that.
I see.
I'm absolutely that person willing to do that. Well, okay, I won't play. Um, but anyway, it is a really interesting work and one that comes towards the end of his career. We've talked a lot less about specific works after the war and more about the things he was doing, rather, you know, what he was declining these awards, declining teaching.
Mm.
And I think it was kind of after Bolero, people were already getting a little worried about him because he was growing absent-minded. He was having trouble keeping up with deadlines, which
Mm.
was something that I think he did not have a problem with before. And a few years later, in 1932, he's in a pretty bad car accident. And this is an unfortunate type of story you read about this time period from other musicians too. He gets in a car accident, he hits his head pretty hard, and it didn't seem like a big deal at first, but within a year, he had or was experiencing, I think, what we call aphasia, difficult time with language, speaking, understanding. Apparently, he was able to hear music, but he could not write music.
Mm.
He finished a couple of songs that he had started, but he wasn't able to finish, like, I think, something for a film. He couldn't do anything else, and
Mm.
so that was it.
Hmm.
A few years go by. In 1937, he goes under some neurosurgery. Again, can you imagine
Mm.
that?
That early.
Yeah. And he goes into a coma after this, and then he dies December 28th, 1937. And we see this problem with language and what's going on with his brain, I guess,
Hmm.
but also they see it before, you know, in 1928, 1929. I'm wondering, with everything we've seen and experienced, Linda, today, especially after 9/11, the toxins
Mm.
and the chemicals, just the things you are exposed to in the military are so deleterious on your body. I mean, even 10 years later, I wonder how much was that in effect? Was there some aspect of that? I wouldn't be surprised if there was some kind of connection between this and the war, his experience.
I agree, especially World War One. You know, you hear a lot about that kind of thing going on in World War One.
Mhm.
I mean, maybe things have gotten a little bit better as far as armaments and exposure and things. I'm not sure, but in World War One, that was a rough one.
Chemical weapons were used quite heavily, but that is Maurice Ravel's life. I mean, incredible, split by a major event like World War One. But the music he put out, and also just as important, I think, who he was as a person, his humble nature, although he dressed to the nines, he was
Mm.
exquisite.
Hmm.
But he didn't need the Legion of Honor. He didn't need to be so and so's teacher. He didn't need this or that. He just needed a humble room, it sounds like, and a piano.
Yeah, meticulous is a really good word to describe Maurice Ravel. Meticulous in his music. He would spend a lot of time poring over music and taking out things, not putting in,
Mhm.
taking out anything extraneous. By nature, he was private.
Yeah.
He had a small circle of friends during his lifetime, but he never married, and he preferred to live in solitude outside of Paris.
Yeah.
And if you'd like to hear some of these pieces that we've been talking about of Maurice Ravel, we've prepared a playlist of his significant works, and we will list that on the show notes section of this podcast.
Yes, at classicalbreakdown.org. Well, that's all I have on Maurice Ravel, Linda. I think it's become more clear for me the story I mentioned in the beginning. He's watching this street naming ceremony from a cafe, sipping wine. Maybe that is the way to approach a situation like that. I think at least that's become more clear for me, how and why he did something like that. But do you have anything else for Maurice Ravel?
No, I'm very happy to have joined you today because he's one of my very favorite composers.
Well, Linda, we are going to now enjoy a full performance of his iconic string quartet in F major, and we're going to hear the Malus Quartet. Thanks for listening to Classical Breakdown, your guide to classical music. For more information on this episode, visit the show notes page at classicalbreakdown.org, and you can send me comments and episode ideas to classicalbreakdown@weta.org. And if you enjoyed this episode, leave a review in your podcast app. I'm John Banther. Thanks for listening to Classical Breakdown from WETA Classical.